Hello and welcome to another episode of World Football Summit at Home, this interview series that we kicked off a few weeks ago to try to make your confinement a little bit more bearable and also to try to assess, with the assistance of experts across the sports industry, how the global crisis unleashed by the unfortunate coronavirus pandemic is going to impact and reshape the sports business in the future. Today I'm honored to be joined by Michael Broughton, who is a fan engagement, marketing and technology expert with whom we will be discussing how sports properties are approaching fan engagement these days, in which there's obviously no live sport going on, and how this experience will probably impact the way properties engage with their fans in the future. Michael, how are you? Thank you very much for joining us.
Ah, Thank you for having me, Paco. I'm good. I'm safe. Hopefully, you and the family and everybody else are also home and safe and looking after their families.
We are, and we're happy to hear that. We are safe as well, confined, working from home, juggling that with the kids, which I think is also your case, which is an extra challenge. But
You never know. You may have a special appearance appear here at any time. So we'll see
absolutely,
what happens.
absolutely. Michael, let's get started if you want, because we don't want to take too much time away from you. So my first question would be, obviously, how are you coping with the confinement, and how is this impacting your professional life?
On a professional level, I don't travel. And for the last 18 months, 2 years, I've spent a lot of time on an airplane. So being in one place is pretty unique for me right now. I was commuting weekly to Zurich from London. So again, it's a little bit more stable. Lots of phone calls, lots of Zooms and Microsoft Teams. Those seem to be the two products I've used the most. Trying to navigate what comes next, and trying to take the time to read a lot. I've read some really interesting books. The Future is Faster Than You Think being my favorite so far. And I've just read the Bob Iger Ride of a Lifetime. Very good as well. I highly recommend it. And trying to take the extra time at home to think what does come next, right? Mostly in sport, we go week to week because we always have another event coming. I know in your line of work, you always have another event coming. So how do you get the next group to come? This is giving me a bit more space to step back and actually have the breathing room to think, okay, how would you reimagine it going forward? So interesting.
Well, what comes next is definitely the ultimate question we're trying to answer here. But before we get there, Michael, I'd like to know your thoughts as an expert in fan engagement on how sport properties are facing the huge challenge of engaging their fans without live content. We're seeing a lot of archive content, of course, but we're also seeing some pretty interesting stuff. A lot of traditional sport properties turning to esports, for example, and also some great content on athlete social media.
Most of what you've seen is relatively predictable. Very good use of archive. I think you've seen a lot of cool stuff around esports, which I think will obviously grow. Whether that's NASCAR, some stuff that 11 have done, Formula One, the La Liga's done a whole tournament. So I think there's been some really interesting embracing of the archive that has probably been less utilized in the past, but for obvious reasons of having live content. I think you've got a few areas where we could do better. I think because we've relied on sport content being live for so long, this is something we're just not ready for, and that's okay. We're going to learn and we're going to get better. I think yesterday I saw Man City and Southampton play tic-tac-toe with their logos on social media. I thought, it's just fun, right? Two clubs having a go at each other who have a sense of humor, and I thought that was a lot of fun. The case study I've used online and talked about on LinkedIn was Joe Wicks. I don't know if you know him, but he's a personal trainer in the UK who's quite famous for his cookbooks. And he came on and said, look, Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. every day UK time, I'm going to do a physical education class for your kids. And I think it's averaging about 750,000 live views on his YouTube. and he's donating all the revenue he gets from YouTube to the NHS. And I just think his brand profile is going to just balloon, phenomenal. Now, as a single person, he can pivot very quickly. Right? He can't personal train right now, so he's using it to build a brand. It would be great to see some other clubs and sports entities sit there and say, rather than just post a video of our athlete doing some keepy uppies or on a Peloton bike training, how do we actually use them to say, okay, you're at home. If you're Chelsea, and I'm a fan of Chelsea, why don't they have Frank Lampard do a workout at home? Right? How does he stay fit and healthy? How do you keep the players fit and healthy so that every coach that's out there trying to keep their kids training at home when they're not being able to meet as a group can say, look, guys, go and watch the Chelsea video or the Liverpool, whatever it may be.
Joe Wicks is definitely doing an awesome job these days, and as you suggest, Michael, many athletes and properties will probably follow his path in the future. But Michael, the fact that some sport properties are really struggling these days to create content relates somehow to something that you've mentioned several times in your LinkedIn articles about properties not quite acknowledging the fact that they are part of the content business, right?
Most sports entities at the top tier consider themselves a content or media business now. And I'm not 100% in agreement with that, but if you really do believe that, why aren't the CEOs and chief commercial officers being hired out of big content businesses? Right. So to me, if that's where you fundamentally believe you're coming from, that's who you should be hiring. Right. And I'm still not seeing enough of those hires happen to be convinced that the chairman, owners, CEOs, or whatever it is, rights holder, presidents, really believe they are in the content business, because otherwise they'd be hiring a content person rather than a, say, sponsorship person. Because from there, you then build your sponsorship proposition and so on.
And being able to create specific content for the different audiences relates to another topic that you've addressed in your articles, Michael, which is the community focus, right? Technology has obviously enabled clubs to generate massive global audiences, but is this somehow making them lose their community focus vocation? Michael, you claim that communities exist even within that global audience, right?
I think it's because community now has, in my view, too narrow a focus. So when people talk about community, what they mean generally is their local community, right? The mile or 2 miles, their village, their town, your suburb that you live in Madrid, whatever it may be. And to me, that's not the right definition of community, particularly in a sports. So if you are Valladolid or you're Hartlepool, your community is likely to be Valladolid, right? It's unlikely to extend, even with Ronaldo as a co-owner, to be much further beyond that. If you're Real Madrid or you're Chelsea or Liverpool, Man United, your audience is global. But within that, there are multiple communities. So you will have the one from Madrid, which is a local hardcore audience. You'll have the Spanish who are Real Madrid affiliated, to the people in China. And there'll be crossover within these communities. So to me, we have to change what we mean by community. It's not just what you see at Christmas of going around to your local hospital, shaking hands, giving presents, and putting some nice PR out there. The word community for me should encompass anyone within your target group, your audience, whether they're casual or fanatical. So all of this for me comes out of just looking at the history of sport and where it came out of. So first of all, obviously, it was preparation for war. And then post-industrial revolution, it was about literally the local community with a club and creating something to come around. As we've grown into a global society, that sense of community is broken up a bit and is expanded globally. So I think if you rethink what we mean by community, it helps you start to say, okay, what are the subsects? How do I track to them? How do I speak to them? What are they? So now you need a data engine and the marketing tools kit of the tech stack in order to enable that. What's interesting for me is that my father and I and my son are all within one subset. We are all hardcore Chelsea fans, right? Yet we are also in different subsects. So my father is lean back. right? He's not on Twitter. He's not on social media very much. He's sat on a sofa watching 90 minutes and reading the paper. He probably has more in common with an elderly gentleman in Brazil or the US than with me in that sense, right? Because I'm lean in, right? My son is lean in, but in an entirely different way, which is he wants to interact totally. And he only wants to watch, he won't watch 90 minutes with me. He'll walk in and out during a game and he wants to watch the highlights. He'll often have seen the highlights before I have, right? So he'll know what happened. He'll tell stories to me, and I'm like, how do you know that already? So in some sense, he is part of my sect because he's a fanatic, he's a fan, but he's also in a different community, which is the hyper engaged. I'm in a crossover with my father and him. So I think again, how you then dissect that means different tools in the marketing technology kit can be used to get to different people in different ways. How is it appropriate? And I don't think it needs to be rocket science. I think you can build a pretty simple MarTech stack to get to a lot of people in different ways and really boost your connection and your involvement with people.
And Michael, you mentioned the word involvement right now. Would that be a more appropriate way to refer to the relationship between fans and sport properties right now, considering the active role that fans are playing, even as content creators themselves?
So this is kind of, and look, I think you're going to see this right now. Everybody's looking at their contracts, and the wording in the contract is really important. And I learned this having to negotiate, share purchase agreements and doing deals with suppliers. How you use your language is really important. So I think fan engagement is great. And I say that because 10, 15 years ago, it didn't really exist. Now, if I come to an event of yours, there's likely to be a number of forums, a number of companies pitching, and lots of questions about how do we engage with our fans. So first of all, if I think the use of language is very important, where are we going to with fan engagement? What does that mean? And I take it as Web 1.0, right? Which is very much, I will create content and I will put it on the internet and I will send it to you, which is a very broadcast style mentality. And that's fine. And that's where we started with the internet. I just think that Web 2.0, Web 3.0 is much more interactive. Now, that doesn't mean you don't still have people like my father who are just wanting to consume what you give me. But there are plenty of others who want to cut, create, and engage in a different way. So I ended up dissatisfied with engagement as the word. I went away and did some research, and I landed on the word involvement because it was about action. It was about participation. It didn't mean that participation had to be lean in. It could be lean back. Most importantly, involvement has an emotional attachment. Right? Engagement, to me, it might be implied, but it's not specific, whereas involvement is very much specific. This is an emotional attachment. And I think if you're trying to grow a sport, trying to grow a fan base, if you're trying to take someone from casual to fan, that requires emotional attachment, right? If you want that 400 million followers or whatever the number is the club wants to put out there, 400 million is casual. Within that, there's probably 25 million, if you're lucky, of fans. So how do you drive them down that marketing funnel? That's emotional. I learned that when I was selling cigarettes and alcohol as a sports marketeer. Take them from the rational to the emotional, and you have them for life. So yeah, if you start putting in front of mind, how am I involving this audience? How would they want to be involved? How do I drive an emotional attachment and an emotional involvement? I think that starts to change what you're creating, how you're creating it, and what you're asking for from your audience, from casual all the way down to fanatic. And it will be different, which goes back to you need a MarTech stack that allows you to understand who they are, where they are, what they're doing, and how you'll engage with them.
Thank you, Michael. And the last question, going back to where we started, What comes next for the sports industry once this coronavirus nightmare is over, which we hope it will be soon, and we can get back to our normal lives? How will that normal life look like, at least in terms of fan engagement in sports?
I think I think the first thing to say is I think some of the things that were already happening will be accelerated, right? So I think more clubs and rights holders will understand that during this time they had no interaction with their fans, that they understood of what was going on, and they need a real data system and marketing skills. Who is a fan, how to interact with them, and how to engage with them in the future. Should anything like this ever happen again, and help them. So I think you'll see an investment in data accelerate. I think we need to understand that the athletes are becoming ever more powerful, and that will only increase over the next few months, as they are the only form of sport original content happening at the moment. And the power of the fans. They are also now the content generators at a exponential level. So those things were already happening, and I think this will only increase. That leads me to more personalization. So I think it'll be interesting to see what OTT players survive this, because most of them are early-ish stage businesses, still making losses. So how do you survive an era like this where there's no incoming cash and you were already cash strapped, but it was okay because you were a growth company? If you don't have any growth for 6 months, what happens? I think there's some data out of the US that OTT is growing, as is cable viewership, because more people are stuck at home. But the OTT I imagine they're talking about is Disney Plus is probably going through the roof, right? They've managed to time that very luckily. So I think Netflix is probably going up, Amazon Prime is probably going up. All these things, other things will get cut, those will go up. So I don't think anything radical will happen necessarily, but I think the things that were already happening will massively accelerate.
Thank you so much, Michael. It was a real pleasure talking with you today. Some extremely interesting takeaways for everyone to think about. And as we've seen also, still some important questions on the table to be answered. And that's what we'll try to do here at World Football Summit at Home. So stay tuned to our YouTube channel and also to the Football Industry Podcast, because there will be more interviews coming up soon. In the meantime, please stay safe and take care of yourselves. Goodbye.